to order. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our first meeting of 2019, so Happy New Year to all of you, and also Chinese New Year, so we have 2 New Years to celebrate. Before we get into the meeting, I'd like to recognize 2 mayors, His Worship Mayor Dave Barron from Richmond Hill, and His Worship Mayor Scarpati from Markham. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Before we get into our meeting, I'd like to invite Annalise Cerny, Executive Vice President of Presto, to lead our safety briefing. Thanks, Annalise.
So for those who don't know, every meeting at Metrolink starts with a safety briefing and a safety moment, so I'll take us through that. So in the effort to ensure the safety of everyone in the room, I'll just give the following instructions, and those who are named have already been asked and have volunteered. So in the event of an emergency, Helen Ferrer-Walker will be responsible for calling 911. Greg Percy will be responsible for escorting the emergency services to the meeting room, and our designated first aider will be Mark Childs. The first aid kit, automated external defibrillator, and nearest fire extinguisher are all located in the kitchen area, which is just outside the boardroom over here. If the emergency alarm goes off and it resembles a slow ringing bell, everyone is to remain calm and await further instructions. If the alarm is fast and loud, which would be the second phase, the emergency evacuation procedures will begin. And so we're to listen to the instructions, which in general are that everyone is to leave the meeting area in a calm and orderly fashion and make their way down the main staircase to the ground floor and exit the building onto Front Street West. Elevator service will be automatically suspended. In the case that the main staircase is unavailable, there are other exits further down the hallway. Once outside, all individuals should make their way to the designated assembly area, which is located on the west side of the Fairmont Royal York Hotel, along the east sidewalk of the York Street, where we'll gather and ensure that everyone has exited safely. Normally we do a head count, but because there are a large number of people in the room, please look to your left and to your right. And in the event of an evacuation, once we arrive at the assembly area, please look for those neighbors and ensure that there's safety. In addition to the briefing, as I mentioned, we always do a safety moment. And that's intended to help us reflect and embed safety in our daily lives, and in addition to reflecting on our workplace experiences. And instead of calling on someone, I'll actually give a safety moment, which many of my colleagues have already heard. But over the Christmas holidays, my mother had a stroke. The end of the story is she's perfectly well, so don't worry. But it was an amazing experience to go through, because in the moment that she had the stroke, my husband said she's having a stroke, and I yelled, "Call 911." And two incredibly important things happened. One was we grew up in Canada, decades ago, and we had heard over and over and seen over and over ads on TV about recognizing the signs of stroke. And so for me, it was a reminder that even if you don't listen, if you're repeated things over and over, they do end up somewhere in the back of your brain, and in the moment of need, out it pops. And so we actually recognize the signs of stroke despite having not had formal training and not having had experiences in the past, which would have led us to make that conclusion. Second thing is obviously that emergency services were close and we were well cared for. And the second point was that we all thought my mother was fine. And us not being medical professionals, were unqualified to make that conclusion. And the paramedics insisted that we remind and in fact encourage, if not force, my mother to go to the hospital despite the fact that she felt okay. So we stepped in and said, no, I think we're gonna follow the instructions and the recommendations of the paramedics. And in fact, it was in the hospital that she actually had the real stroke. What we had seen was a warning. And had we not followed those instructions, the outcome would have been very, very different. And so obviously for all of us, it was traumatic in the moment, and it's a bit of a shock and a reminder to hug your friends and family, but also that remaining calm and following the instructions actually is really the best thing to do. And so to ask for help and then follow it when it comes.
Thank you. Before I get into recognizing some past board members, I forgot to recognize someone else who's attending with us today, an MPP, King Masurma, who's the PA to the Minister of Transport, so welcome. Today we acknowledge several outgoing board members who have contributed extensively to improving transit for our region through their years of service on this board. There are a couple of them here today. Rahul Bhardwaj served as on the Metrolinx board for almost 10 years, providing strong governance leadership as chair of the Governance Committee and as a member of the Human Resource and Compensation Committee. He was still on the committee when we were looking for new board members and interviewed most of the people that you will be introduced to shortly who are on the board. So thank you very much, Rahul. I'd also like to thank another previous board member. As chair of the Customer Experience Committee, Marianne McKenna has been instrumental in charting a new direction for how Metrolinx engages its customers. Marianne's dedicated more than 5 years to deepening our organization's commitment to an enriched customer experience. Thank you very much, Marianne. The following board members who have retired could not be here. Bonnie Patterson, who served as a member of the Executive Committee and Human Resources and Compensation Committee for almost 6 years and always provided thoughtful perspectives on the various stakeholder and human resource initiatives. Howard Shearer, who served on the board since July of 2012 as a member of the Executive Committee, the Audit, Finance and Risk Management Committee, and the Capital Oversight Subcommittee. Through the work in these committees, we've seen more structure and streamlined processes for how we do business here at Metrolinx. And lastly, Charlene Stewart, who served on the Metrolinx board for over 2 years, provided important contributions to the Customer Experience Committee and Human Resources and Compensation Committee. The board of directors and everyone at Metrolinx extend our deepest appreciation to each of these folks for their years of service and commitment to Metrolinx. Thank you very, very much. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome our new board members. Luigi Ferreira, maybe you could stand just to see, so people can see you as I say your names, is the Dean of the Center of Arts, Design and Information Technology at George Brown College and will chair our Customer Experience Committee. Michael Krolajevic comes to us with a 30-year background in real estate and land development. Emily Moore brings a wealth of engineering and new technology development experience spanning more than 20 years. Robert Poirier comes to us with a 25-year career in banking, investments, and technology, and currently serves as the chair of the board of Ports Canada, Toronto, sorry. Cleo Storan is a senior financial analyst with TD Bank. She is a member of the Fond du Lac First Nation in Saskatchewan and serves as the board vice president of Anishinaabe Health Center here in Toronto. Paul Saparas, his career spans more than 30 years in technology, and he has been a member of our Presto subcommittee before joining the board. A warm welcome to you all, and I look forward to serving with you. Now I'll go through the correspondence received by the board since the last meeting. Correspondence from John Henry, Regional Chair and CEO of the Regional Municipality of Durham, dated December the 5th, about the GO expansion full business case, Metrolinx transit-oriented development strategy, and the impacts to the Lakeshore East extension. Correspondence from Jeff Winch, dated December 27th, regarding Presto on the Up Express. Correspondence from His Worship Frank Scarpati, Mayor of the City of Markham and Chair of the York Regional Rapid Transit Corporation Board, dated February the 5th, regarding the Relief Line business case development. And correspondence from Peter Majazek, Fred Weingast, and Ricardo Mashrigi. I'm probably really crucifying these names, but anyway. Members of Keep York Moving, dated February the 4th, regarding the Relief Line business case development. That's the end of the correspondence. So now I'll hand it over to Phil Verster to give his CEO update. Bill?
Good afternoon, everyone. At our first meeting in 2019, I'd like to touch on some of the high points of our last year, and 2018 was a phenomenal year for us. We've set about to change the way we do business, and that has meant that we've changed our organization significantly. In many parts of our organization, we are now doing things differently to what we've done it before. We have the motto of operate as a business and focus on getting the right and objective, fact-based, knowledge-based decisions out there, act commercially and make sure we increase the value for taxpayers and the value for our shareholder. Those decisions are really important, and the past year has seen many of those. And I can pick up on one which is in the public domain and will be in the public domain more in the coming months, and that's our program on transit-oriented development, where we are saving significant sums of money for taxpayers while securing benefits in terms of how stations are built and delivered on our railway. And this allows us to do so much more with the funds we have to facilitate programs and expand the services we've got. I would like to particularly pick up on the fact that over the last year, we've grown our services by 23%. This has gone largely unheralded because it's good news and it affects incrementally so many communities out there. Doubling of our off-peak service on Lakeshore East has had a huge uptake in off-peak travel, and 50% increase on Lakeshore West have similarly been exceptionally well received. We have also opened up 4 years early. I would say it's closer to 5 or 6 years early, but we say 4 years early, the services to Niagara, which is a year-round morning service. And we have exciting plans to continue to expand the services to Hamilton as well as to Niagara. 4 years early. We've expanded our services on the Kitchener Corridor, and we have a service reintroduction of the express service next week, which is very exciting. We've taken possession of new Tier 4 locomotives, which are diesel electrical locomotives, and will strengthen our fleet significantly, which is exciting for us. Century-old bridges, 109-year-old bridges, we've replaced on Lakeshore West, 7 or 8 of them during last year, which has been huge for us, and the impact on our services have been unfortunate, but we've worked with our customers to make sure that there's no lasting effects in their travel patterns, and replacing that infrastructure has been absolutely critical for us. Presto's customer satisfaction score has gone up to 80% across the region. It's a huge success for us. And while Presto often attracts commentary, and if things go slightly wrong with Presto, it affects people, and we understand that, and we continuously work hard to improve Presto. But with a customer satisfaction score of 80% is a fantastic outcome for us. What's really exciting is in November and December, we transitioned nearly 200,000 TTC users to Presto as we went from the Metro Pass to Presto. And that in itself has brought great customer satisfaction feedback and very little response for such a big transition of people's behaviors. We're very excited about the GO expansion business case. Changing how we deliver services out to the regions is a massively big, important thing for us. And a year ago when I joined, I was very worried about the procurement model and the way we were setting about it, and we've changed so much about that procurement. We now have 4 international consortia that are committed to this program, and we have a very exciting period now to get those services that will serve communities in Richmond Hill, York, Lakeshore, Barrie. It's an exciting time to expand GO services even more to the communities that depend on our GO services. The construction of the Kipling cross intermodal bus terminal, which is a large mobility hub, started and is exciting, and cards on the table. The very important program that we have with Eglinton and Crosstown, we've made huge strides over the last year to get that back into the delivery time frame and put it on a commercial footing, which will ensure delivery by September 2021. So exciting times. It's a great time to be at Metrolinx. Since our last meeting, we've achieved the milestone of employing 100 apprentices. 100 apprentices, those young people that make a difference to the future of our industry, on the Crosstown project through our community benefits program. This community benefits program of ours is now considered best practice for large capital programs. We are consistently staying with that program. We'll do the same on the GO program as well as on Finch West and all of our LRTs. We've also launched our Presto app. A year tracks on Google as one of the most used apps, very popular. It allows Android and Apple technologies to give people access to their account and to transactions such as auto load, and it's just really, really cool. And you'll see that. We talked about the GO service, and I've been very public about the fact that we didn't get it right on the Kitchener-Waterloo service. We increased the service by 25%. That message has got lost, rightly so, in the fact that we adjusted the service pattern for our customers, took the express service away without really consulting enough with our customers. And I've been really open about that we need to do that better. And very often in these situations, the measure of the company is how well we respond to the issue we have on the table. And we've moved really fast. The background to all of the negotiations and all of the logistics we had to do with CN to get the expansion of services which will allow us to increase services to Kitchener again during the next couple of months and years. All of that is overshadowed by the fact that that awareness of what customers want is crucial to the decisions we make at the time. So we've moved rapidly, and I'm very pleased to say that on the 13th next week, we are actively putting the service back in the evening peak, the express service, and the response from customers on this has been extremely positive. And so we learn, and that is really important as an organization to learn. It's even more important to avoid it in the future, so we'll focus on that as well, but we learn from the experience. I'm very excited about something we piloted with Scarborough's Agincourt GO Station Group, a very active community in Agincourt, and we've got to adopt a station approach, which is really very popular, where we engage the community to share with us how they think we can interact with local groups and how we can just look after their station, help them to look after their station, and make the station effective in their community. I've done this in a couple of jurisdictions in the past, very, very popular with communities. It gives people a say. It's also good for us because it gives us avenues with which we can listen to communities better. And this is very important for us. So 2019 is a year of big things and holds a lot of promise for us. We're very aware of the huge topics that are on the table. We're going to talk about some huge topics today, and I really welcome the two mayors being here because it's good to get a common view on how important these transit programs are for all of our communities. Communities are in such need of good transit, and very often we are locked into processes that cause us to not build things as fast as we can. And I think this year we're going to see movement in that space where we're going to focus on how do we build things quicker and faster. And I'm very excited about that. If we talk about recognition, we use the board to recognize people. And I would like to just recognize our HR team, first of all. We've been, as an organization, acknowledged as one of Canada's top employers for young people. This is the 7th consecutive year. And I'd like to just, our whole organization has got such a focus on what we do with young people, how we focus on diversity and inclusion, and part of that focus reflects in being acknowledged as an industry leader with employing the generation of the future. And to Helen and her HR team, just fantastic work. I'd also like to recognize our communications team that sets up our Ask Metrolinx Town Hall series. I'm not sure whether this community is aware of that, but we have this very public Ask Metrolinx session where with different media access, web access, as well as physical access in the room, as well as internet access to come and ask questions beforehand, and where we personally answer questions and we hold ourselves accountable to our communities to ask us questions in public. And we do that. We've done that for it's about 9 months now. We've had about 4 or 5 of them. We do it every 2 months or so. Fantastic uptake. The community come ask us. They ask difficult questions. We answer honestly. We say this is true and this is not true, and that's how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to fix. And this team, this whole engagement has been recognized by the Visual Arts, Audio and Visual Arts International Interactive Communication Citizen Engagement through Ask Metrolinx Award. That's a long title, but we got it. So that's what's great. So it's an international award. It recognizes the excellence of our team in planning, concept, direction, design, and production. And I just want to say this: we don't spend money outside for someone to do it. We do it all. That's our teams in-house. Our own people have put this together as part of what they put together today as well. So it's fantastic. To Jamie and the Communications and Public Affairs team. But now I'd like to introduce you to a very special group of people. On the 10th of December, a train was pulling into one of our platforms at Union Station, and a young woman, passenger, became dizzy and disoriented. She fell forward, and her head made contact with the train. And one of the worst things we fear at platforms is when someone falls between the platform and the train. With the under-frame equipment on a train vehicle, you can very easily get hooked and pulled underneath the train. And unfortunately, the lady fell between the platform and the train. And if it wasn't for the quick reaction of fellow travelers around her, people from our community of customers, as well as our employees, the situation could have been very, very severe. And today I'd like to acknowledge some of our employees as well as customers, people who are on the platform. If I can ask Don, if Don can sort of hand over awards, and I would like to call them out, please, if you don't mind. And so first, Quinn Hatchie. Quinn intervened. Quinn, come forward, please. I mean, you're a hero today. So Quinn, just hang around a moment. So it's not, you're not going to get away that quickly. So Quinn very quickly responded, quickly gave action to the woman who fell, comforted her, and ensured that emergency services were contacted. And also sacrificed his own time, remained at the scene till our transit safety officers arrived. Quinn, really, thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. And then, if I could ask Erin Mould. Erin also responded really quickly and called 911 and also remained on site till the emergency services arrived. And these are customers of ours. And it's fantastic. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate that you stepped in for a fellow customer. And that's fantastic. And so then Amy Morgan is one of our customer service ambassadors. And Amy recognized that there was a serious situation. Amy contacted Network Operations Control, directed the EMS and transit safety officers, and ensured the train did not move while the victim was still close to the track bed. And all of you, thank you very much. Ian Schroeder. Ian Schroeder and Ocean Lee, two Further Go customers, were also part of this heroic group, but were not able to make it today. And we nonetheless want to recognize them for assisting the victim, comforting her, and helping to safely remove her from the track bed. Thank you very much to all three of you. I now ask Albert Taylor, Senior Legal Counsel, to do the appointment of officers.
There's a report before the board appointing some of our executive suite officers. Our new Chief Financial Officer, Jennifer Gray, Executive Vice President of Go Expansion, Matt Clark, who will also be in the acting capacity of Chief Capital Officer. And lastly, Peter Zook, who will be taking on the Chief Program Officer role. And that's the report.
Could I have a motion? Thank you, Mike. A seconder? Thanks, Emily. Any questions? Okay, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Okay. So the next topic is the relief line, and we're going to get help here from Matthew. Matthew?
Yes.
And Leslie Wu.
If I could let David Phelp, our manager on the file, also join us. Do you want to start? I'll start. So on behalf of the staff and the work, we want to give an update on where we are and work that we have been developing on the relief line. I also want to welcome two folks, Matthew, maybe introduce them from the TTC and from the City of Toronto, who are here to join us.
So that was James Perdelaw and Malcolm Mackay, who we've been working very closely with.
James is the Director of Planning, and Malcolm is the TTC lead on the relief line work. There is, the item before you is not for a specific decision, it's for information. And I'm going to turn it over to Mathieu to help take you through some of the key slides. I assume that you take it as read, and so we will just feature the highlights and then open for discussion.
So it's really to update you on the three streams of work that have been advanced in the last few months. So we're looking at the portfolio of projects of Relief Line North, Relief Line South, and the Yonge North Subway extension. So they're all priority projects. They were mentioned in the Big Move and in the 2041 Regional Transportation Plan, and they received continued support from the City of Toronto Council and the Region of York Councils, especially in 2017 when it enabled them to advance to preliminary and design and engineering for Relief Line South and Yonge North Subway extension. So they're tracking to, they're in the preliminary design and engineering phase and tracking to get to that end of the stage gate where you have a preliminary design business case at the end of 2019. Whereas Relief Line North is in the initial business case phase. So I'll go through very quickly through these. The three streams of work are, so advancing, really working and getting ready, getting in the right spot to prepare the preliminary design business case for Relief Line South. Then giving you a very brief information on Relief Line North, and then the work that we've done, and finishing with the work that we've done on the network-wide effects of and the recent modeling findings. For Relief Line South, so the idea was to review the business case work. So it's in preliminary design right now, but we went back to the initial business case work just to make sure that the options, that we understand well the options. I think the key for us was we've made a series of updates to our modeling tools, and one of them is about better capturing the benefits of crowding and the benefits and impacts on safety, as well as time savings from partially served latent demand. So these are two things that appear today in the modeling that we struggled to model and monetize in previous iterations, and so we wanted to run through the six initial alignments that the City of Toronto had looked through and get them through that new framework, and also to provide just overall consistency in the way we analyze projects so that we're on the same baseline as the other projects that are being currently analyzed. So the key findings of this are, first, in the different alignments, one of the keys to get to a good business case is the alignments that they need to serve the former industrial areas that have the potential to become major employment areas in Toronto, such as the Unilever precinct and the West Don Land. So the two alignments that go through there that serve these lands well fare a bit better than the other ones because they both provide relief and they add new riders, and also with good complementary riders with contra-peak ridership, since that will be potential employment lands. So these are the two alignments and that perform best, and they're very comparable. And so the Toronto Council preferred and approved alignments is one of these two, and that performs the best. So overall, I'll go back. What we also see is that the benefits cost ratio is it hovers around 1 for all these alignments. So it's a little bit above 1 for the 2 preferred ones, and for the preferred one along Queen Street. But it's slightly above 1. So that means it's a good project. It provides good value for money, but we have to be a bit careful about making sure that we reap all the benefits in terms of how we're going to implement the service. So really think about how to do that. And I think TOD that Phil mentioned earlier is one of the ways also to try to gather all these benefits, try to really maximize the benefits, really optimize the way the stations are designed and integrated so that we can get these benefits. And we have to be also very careful about controlling the costs so that the costs don't grow, as we understand there are technical challenges to do that, and controlling these costs will also be important to maintain that very good BCR. So this exercise, so we're still in a preliminary phase. We're tracking towards a complete initial business case with both these economic results as well as updated strategic and deliverability results in the spring. So the second item that we worked on, so I'll just go briefly on this one. So with the City of Toronto and TTC, we've been working on defining the alternatives for Relief Line North. So we're still working on these 6 alternative routes and working towards developing a short list of alternatives that will really go through the full business case analysis, the full modeling and economic analysis. So the current work on this is really to refine some of these broad corridors, to look at also some deliverability, some major obstacles, so that we can get there and be able to track to by the end of the year, basically, with a good, solid business case. And the third stream of work we've been working on is to look at all the network effects of these. So we know they're connected, and we want to ensure that the way they perform together is optimal. So this figure is an indicative drawing which highlights the trends in the modeling work. So it's still work in progress. The models, we still have kind of high and lower ranges. I mean, that's kind of part of modeling, and but these are the main trends that really come out of this modeling exercise. What's new in there is that compared to previous positions that the Metrolinx has taken, the first thing is our forecast now extends to 2041, whereas previously we were focused on a shorter time horizon of 2031, and so we're using both kind of the growth plan assumptions and using more market-based assumptions to be able to forecast what the high and low ranges of demand would be in 2041. And the second one is it's also informed with recent census results in 2016, which suggest that downtown employment will be more. Right now, it looks like it will be more in the higher end of the forecasting range than in the lower end, and this has been informing our work. So basically, what this diagram indicates, and there's still some work to do to get to final consolidated results in the winter, is that there needs to be some relief provided by Relief Line South to be able to accommodate the new riders from the Yonge Subway extension and new riders from Toronto Growth, because the ridership comes from everywhere in the city, and we just want to ensure that all these new riders on Line 1 benefit from all the safety, reliability, and comfort that Relief Line South will generate. And it does suggest also that in the 2041 horizon, Relief Line North is a potential solution to provide relief. There may be some other ones, but we see if no alternative relief solution is provided by 2041, we will have some capacity issues on that line again. And this is taking into account, so there you have the little red marks that show also that in the short term there's also the overall effort that the TTC has been implementing and will be implementing on Line 1 capacity enhancement, including automatic train control and operations. And that's the one you see in the first diagram on the left, where the capacity of Line 1 will already increase significantly in the short term. But by 2041, the growth factors today show that we're still having a very heavily loaded line, and so this shows how everything plays out.
The important slide is the next one that shows progress. Before Mathieu does that, I just want to add 3 core messages to why this study is important. Firstly, before I go through those 3 messages, I want to just express the very close collaborative working between York Region, City of Toronto and TTC and Metrolinx on understanding how this fits in the overall plans. But here we need to do more as a region to figure out how we deliver things overall that provides safe solutions and best solutions for customers. And one of the challenges that we've got is, in all of this discussion, we've not really done enough, perhaps, to think about what GO services on the Richmond Hill line can also contribute to communities going forward. And that's something that we've got a piece of work that we don't discuss here, but is in the background. The three core messages about the Yonge North extension, the subway solution for Downtown Relief Line South and Downtown Relief Line North, is that we have to build subways quicker. And I think that's the core message. This is not a study that says there are winners or losers here, or that one scheme is more important than the other scheme. We need to find ways to do both downtown relief lines as well as the Yonge North extension. All of it needs to be done as quickly as possible. There's no preference one over the other. There's only one factor, and this is the second key point. We need to ensure that service introduction is safe and that we get the best change in behaviors from a currently very busy, overcrowded network on line 1 relative to the service requirements for the future. And so the whole discussion that we are focusing on in our development of this business case and the advice we're giving the province on this particular program is about really how to do this in a way that's focused on customers, focused on customer safety, and focused on safe introduction. And I just want to give a practical perspective. If one assumes there's a build period of around 7 years, or let's say 7 years for now, on some of these big subway schemes, when we know we want it to all deliver in approximately the same end position, there's going to be programs that are going to get started. The programs we are just saying on this last slide about when is the safe time to introduce services. How many months difference is there between the two schemes to make sure behaviors of customers to divert from line 1 is safely achieved to the downtown relief line? But that's a question of a discussion of months. And programs would already be years and years in construction through the difficult stages of construction. But the exciting point is, once we've got all of these mapped out to get the safe introduction strategy, it's not as if one scheme is held up fully till another is delivered. They will all be in motion, should be in motion, depending on, we can't give an answer to that, depending on when funds are available and when funds are committed and how our policy decision makers decide to do this. Our very strong focus here as a community of transit people, and I don't want to speak for York, nor do I want to speak for the TTC, I just want to express the very firm opinion from what we as Metrolinx are seeing, is that both of the Yonge North extension and the downtown relief lines, those two groups of programs are both crucial for the city's development, for the regions and communities they serve. And I think that's really, really important. What we do think is going to be a success factor for that. And our Kitchener service introduction is just a small example of how important it is to allow communities time to understand what the impact of changes in services are and adjust to the new service pattern. And when you look at the next slide then for the next steps, you can see that we're bringing the same focus of getting the business case analysis and facts onto the same footing for the Yonge subway extension as well as for the remainder of Downtown Relief South. Any questions from any members of the board?
No questions. Okay.
Any questions?
I can,
Please, Rob.
thank you. It touches on your opening presentation and a little bit on Phil on safety. You mentioned the business case and that, and I talked about the relief line, that you need to finalize it and you have some dates around that. You also mentioned, I think you called it transit crowding, and which then relates back to Phil's statement on safety. Can you just explain how you actually calculate what goes into your determination of transit crowding?
So today, the way the crowding factor is incorporated is through, basically it factors into the perceived time. So the idea is that if you have, the more crowded the ride is, the more your perceived time is also. So if you're riding for 10 minutes in a non-crowded subway, we calculate it as 10 minutes, but if you have a crowding factor, then it increases. So you have in the modeling, there's a bunch of factors that compound like that time. So you have crowding, you have waiting on platforms. We know that people usually don't like to wait on platforms. So that time is also slightly it's slightly compounded also to reflect that. So it's more of a compounding mechanism to crowding. And so today it's true it doesn't really incorporate, I would say, the full impacts of safety. So it's a good measure to look at, when you're nearing capacity, but I think it does not reflect, potential impacts of severe overcrowding, where there you have some, very strong safety impacts, and these are not well incorporated yet in the model.
Maybe if I could add, I think one of the things that we could start to interpret in the measure of crowding is what would we consider a safety tipping point that would enable us through the model to sort of say, okay, a certain degree of crowding is quote unquote still safe, but for each different station or different locations, depending on the size of the platform and so forth, it's quite possible we can, and I think that's some of the work we're going to see, if we can extract an indicator that would help us understand better these tipping points.
Also think what this study has done, the study has given us a strong sense that we need to really think about what can be done to build subways quicker. And there's a real opportunity for us through Metrolinx's involvement with York and TTC and the City of Toronto in the steering group sessions to be putting forward suggestions on what can be done to make both the Yonge North extension and the downtown relief line, make both of them delivered quicker.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, team.
So the next item on the agenda is Presto law enforcement requests. And Sarah is going to take us through this.
Good afternoon.
Thanks.
So I'm here today to provide you with the annual Presto Law Enforcement Request Data Transparency Report. This is an update to the first of such reports, which was released last March 2018, and it's presented to the board for informational purposes. Under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, in certain circumstances, Metrolinx may share personal information of its Presto customers in response to a reasonable request from law enforcement agencies. And Metrolinx has a process and policy in place to respond to such requests. And in this process and policy, it incorporates the advice received from our regulator, the Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office, through consultations that were held in 2017. What I'd like to do is go quickly through some of the numbers that were presented in the report, and then I can take any questions that you may have. So over 2018, Metrolinx received 94 law enforcement requests. Information was provided only 37% of the time, and that was in 35 instances. 50 of the requests related to law enforcement investigations and offenses, and in these cases, the information was provided in 26 instances. We required court orders for 4 of the instances. The remaining 43 requests were emergency-related requests. That's where information was used to locate a missing person where there were concerns for their health or safety. Numbers in terms of the responses, it was 9 instances where information was provided for these emergency requests. And 34 of the times, we didn't provide any information. For the reasons behind why requests were rejected or modified or asked to be modified, it could be because the request was too broad. They were seeking travel information beyond that which was necessary. The request sought information about an offense that was not committed on a transit property, and in these cases, we required a court order before providing the information. Or the request sought financial transaction information. Again, we required a court order in that type of a request. Or simply the information that they were requesting was not available. To date, Metrolinx has not received any complaints or inquiries from the Information Privacy Commissioner of the province on the policy or the supporting processes. We had committed in 2018 to provide an annual analysis through our transparency report, and in doing that, to review the process and see if there's any areas for improvement. Based on the 2018 report, we believe that the current process and policy provides a level of oversight and rigor that is required to ensure that Metrolinx responds to law enforcement requests in a compliant and transparent manner, and does so while appropriately balancing Metrolinx's commitment to protecting the privacy of Presto customers and maintaining the safety and security of the transit system and its passengers. So going forward, we will continue to publish such an annual report on these measures, and we'll post it, as we do, publicly on the Presto website. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions?
First of all, thanks for the report and for the detailed analysis, because it is useful. One thing I don't fully appreciate or understand is what's involved in a court order. Does that take weeks, days, hours to obtain? And why would we not always require a court order?
It isn't a necessarily lengthy process to obtain a production order. It depends sort of on the circumstances and the investigation that's being led by the enforcement agency. Under the legislation, we're permitted to provide information over to law enforcement for law enforcement investigations. And there are certain circumstances that we've outlined in our policy where we will not require a court order. These circumstances could be where there is an immediate concern for the health and safety of an individual, such as a lost or missing person, in emergencies such as where a person has been injured or is ill, or where there is an investigation that's taking place in relation to a transit operator's property or services. So, such as theft or vandalism, or for the prevention or detection of a crime on the transit property. In these circumstances, we've determined that a court order will not be required. However, in other circumstances, it is generally required, where, for example, the crime relates to an incident committed outside of the transit system. These types of situations are described in our privacy policy for the public.
A quick question. When you read on paper, it's stats and so forth, but it doesn't have the human element. I'm just wondering, can you actually explain, which I think is probably the most interesting from my perspective, is the safety, a missing person. Can you just explain what transpires and how you can help?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of these types of requests that we receive, and we receive, as the numbers speak to it, we do receive them quite often. but not in every instance have we been able to respond to them. So what can assist in terms of the information that's provided for these types of requests is if we're able to, from the day, for example, let's just say from this past weekend, a person was missing, there was concern for their health, they may have some mental health concerns, or they may have left behind a note of some sort. The information that we can provide is from, for example, the day that they were found to be missing up until the day that the law enforcement agency has contacted us. We can provide some travel-related information. If they have a card and if it is registered, for example, and if we can associate that card with an individual, we can provide some travel information that can be very helpful for them to be able to track down the person.
Great. So these could be very active, and you could have distressed families. They're searching for their child. You could provide that they were seen, gone through this station at this time, and
Yes.
and lead to potential.
Yes,
good
it can be
outcomes.
quite helpful in the particular situation. And sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have any information to provide to them, and we've seen situations where the person it has had a very bad ending.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up actually on that note. So we tend to read, the negative associated with, I don't want my information provided. But in that kind of a scenario, I'm assuming that, the time it takes to send that request through law enforcement before we get to recognize it could have dire outcome. So to what extent, if any, do we track, and are there cases where, because of the process, we were too slow to react, and the dire outcome is seen as something we could have prevented?
So
We tend to get the other side of it in terms of the negative press as opposed
yes,
to that
and I
scenario.
think we need to, when we're thinking about how we're managing these law enforcement requests, and according to our policy, is think about it in terms of buckets. We've got emergency requests. We've got requests that are related to criminal and active sort of law enforcement investigations. With the emergency type requests, we're very, very quick to respond. We still follow the same process and rigor in terms of having a law enforcement agency complete a request form, and once they've submitted that to us and we've made contact with the law enforcement agency and confirmed the scope of the request, we work very quickly with our partners at Presto to see if we can find any information and provide that information over. And sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth even with the law enforcement agency, or maybe there's a little bit of a lag in terms of the information that's available.
So can I assume you're confident then that the reputational exposure associated with a process that's too bureaucratic is not something you worry about?
Okay. On the emergency side, we have not had any such concerns.
Please.
Just a quick question. You talk about law enforcement, and I noticed that you're also talking about Metrolinx transit safety. So are the requests on Metrolinx property primarily from transit authorities or from police? I'm just a little bit confused as to what law enforcement, when you say law enforcement, is that police or is that our own transit?
Well, that's actually a very good question. So we receive requests from our transit safety officers, and those requests are treated as if it was coming from a law enforcement agency outside of Metrolinx. They follow the same process, the same oversight and rigor is in place for those types of requests as well. And a large number of actually the requests that we did process for the criminal investigations were from our transit safety officers investigating incidents and situations on our transit system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Sarah, for that report. I just wanted to build on Kathy's point. There's two distinct buckets, as you mentioned. One more bureaucratic. I'm more concerned about the safety aspect. We have a large transit network. Family members get lost, children get lost. Is there a telephone number that a consumer will call that will be answered and that is manned where they can get to an operator in short order because there's a time sensitivity?
Before I answer that question specifically, I just wanted to clarify something. The process that we have in place in terms of receiving, reviewing, and responding to law enforcement requests, whether it is for the purposes of a criminal investigation or it's for purposes of an emergency type situation, it's the same. And the full process is followed. So having said, and then in certain circumstances, for the criminal investigations, we may require court orders if it doesn't fit within the circumstances that's listed in the policy. So having said that, in terms, the requests that our office, the Privacy Office, receives are always from law enforcement officers and agencies, whether they're our own transit safety officers or external to Metrolinx. I'm not quite sure, and I'm looking at my colleague, Alba, to see if there is a number, a hotline that members of the public can call if they haven't gone through law enforcement agencies yet at Metrolinx. I don't believe so, because I haven't heard of any yet.
No, we don't take requests from members of the public.
Annalise.
If I could step in quickly. So Presto serves 11 transit agencies throughout GTHA and Ottawa, 2 of which are owned by Metrolinx, but 9 of which are municipally owned. There is no central, so we don't release any information to anyone other than the cardholder themselves, unless it were to come through an official channel. So the public can't ask, so we do have a call center to serve all customers. It's about 1.8 million active customers per month now. So the number of requests that come in relative to the customer base is very small, but we don't, as a policy, release any information to anyone unless it's coming through law enforcement.
No, maybe I didn't understand your question exactly right, but I was sort of thinking to myself as you were saying it, if I leave my son on the train by mistake, I'm going to say it was my mistake, okay? Okay. And I'm in a panic because I've lost my son.
You should call the police and or transit safety in the jurisdiction that you're riding, and they'll contact.
Right. Okay.
So we don't answer public requests.
Okay.
And thank you for that clarification, Mr.
I don't know
Chair.
if that's what you were really asking.
That's what I was asking. I mean, in terms of being a public agency, I completely understand the privacy issues around information related to security camera footage. But I think the most cases are going to be for safety issues and emergency issues. And I think thinking about it more, that's why the security officers are there, and I would expect that they would be the ones that we would turn to,
Yeah,
and the community
so in
would
a
turn
case such as which the chair has described, someone would either immediately call the police or they'll immediately call our helpline, and the helpline would trigger the transit safety officers. Transit safety officers have done this process, as Sarah and Annalise have shown, would talk to the transit safety officers. The transit safety officers would talk to Presto, and the process will be followed, and that would constitute the type of emergency and/or incident that we would respond to. So the chains are there.
Terrific. Thank you for the clarity.
Any other questions on this topic? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, the next topic is ridership. And Ken and Mark.
Thank you, Chair and Board.
Ken, Mark, and Maureen are going to make this.
So actually, I'm going to very much, first of all, introduce you to Ken Cochet, Director of Insights, and Maureen McLeod, Manager of Analytics. I will absolutely openly profess that these are our data specialists, not myself. So it's my honor to invite them to the table to share with you what has become over the last few months a very rigorous, automated process on a monthly basis where we clearly focus in on ridership, not just to understand the numbers, but to understand the insights and potential implications and opportunities that lie behind those numbers. And Ken, Maureen, and the team are expert in this space and often behind the scenes. So I'm going to give them the floor to walk us through how we're leveraging data and insights to build ridership, our lead driver.
Thank you, Mark. We're also going to take this document as read, so we're going to top line some of the items. I do want to call out to the board that there is a resolution. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is how do we use our Metrolinx data asset to help validate and grow our ridership. So it's both the use of the data plus some of the scenarios that we're applying to that data to. One of the things I first wanted to highlight, because it just came up in the previous session, is around privacy. So the data that we're sharing with you today is all anonymized. So our team does not have any access to customers' personal data. So if there's any concerns about that, I can remove those early on in the presentation. But what I can share is there is a trade-off. So somebody who formerly came from the private sector, there's a group of customers, and it's a significant group, that want communications to be personalized and relevant. And to that, you need personal data. So we have to strike that balance between the people who do not want their data shared and used with the customers who do want it. So it is something that into the future we're going to have to take into consideration. The other thing that's not in the deck, but I think is also worth calling out, and it wasn't apparent to me until I joined Metrolinx, but Metrolinx was really 3 different organizations that were brought together: Presto, AppExpress, and Go. And each one of them had their own data assets. And one of the things that our team started to learn very early on in the process is that the data wasn't always interpreted and looked at the same way. And I'll give a simple example of boardings, ridership, and customers. So from an operations perspective, boardings are really important because boardings tell you how many people actually got onto the vehicle, how close is it to capacity. Ridership, a customer could transfer through. So they're going from point A to point B, and they might take several modes of transit to get from point A to point B, but it's a single ride, but they might board multiple modes of transit. And then the third one is customers. And customers become important because if I have one customer who's taking the train 7 days a week or 7 customers taking it 1 day a week, that has very significant implications from a marketing perspective. How do we communicate to them and how do we talk to them? So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past year has really been trying to get our house in order and getting alignment, working with all of our different partners across Metrolinx. So that's some of the high levels. And what we also see in the data, the map that's up right now, and I think this is probably my favorite part of the presentation, which is we see growth on the Go network of 5.8%, and that's across the network. But really, the magic really happens is at the station level. And each one of these stations is essentially its own community with different growth rates. So we actually see, well, overall, we've got a positive sign. In Lincolnville, we actually see a decline of 8.5%, where in Aurora, we see a gain of 30.5%. I'm just going to turn to Maureen for a second and allow her to provide a bit more insight into why that might be the case.
Sure, and I think these are good examples of how to showcase the advantages of something like this as a tool. If we take Aurora as an example, it's the Golden Star, 30.5% growth as shown in the map. But we have to take a step back and what's happening on this corridor. So we had Kids Go Free, kids are allowed to ride on this corridor for free. We also had increased off-peak service. So we've seen this growth isolated in that off-peak time frame. And in Aurora specifically, these last 2 years, parking has been full in both years. So we can isolate that as it's not so much in the peak that this is happening, it's in those off-peak hours. And it's at that time of day when the service often terminates at Aurora Station. So we've seen double the amount of transfers onto another form of service, whether that be with YRT or Go Transit. So it really helps to isolate that people, when that parking capacity is full, they found another way to get to the station. There's also a lot of parking infractions at this station, so they're also doing that as well. But it's not accounting for all the growth. They're coming to that station either by walking or by biking or by driving or by transferring using transit agencies. I also wanted to isolate there's a lot of growth in this area, so that helps feed the ridership at that station. And then when you flip that over to a station like Lincolnville, where we've seen a reduction in ridership, it's a very small number, but that small number matters to us. We want that to be positive. It's a station, if you've ever visited it, it actually doesn't have a tunnel or an overpass. You actually have to walk over tracks to get to a train in some instances. Customers may be making a choice to not use that station this year as opposed to last year. It's one where there's not many, there's not as much service feeding from a bus perspective. There's some Go buses that go there, but not so much with MSPs, and it's not as much of an area of growth overall. So the population growth in that area isn't as strong. It's more rural. So it helps to isolate. When we looked at if we just had a number of ridership overall, we don't get that picture. We don't get those direct action items that we can when we get something like this, where we can get to the station level with that level of granularity.
I'd be very comfortable to go into great detail on every one of the different scenarios, from the impact of Kids Go Free to what happens when we have construction at a station, what happens when we change our services. But I'd like to open it up to the board to see if they have any questions for us.
I think it might be interesting for the board to understand the kids go free trial, how that's worked out, just,
Absolutely.
30,000 feet kind of view.
Sure. So one of the things that's come across quite consistently through our research and through customer feedback is it's expensive to take the train. So one of the groups that's probably most exposed to that is young families. So people who are just starting their journey. I have 2 young kids, and I can attest that there's a lot of truth to that. So the ability to offer a service that both meets the needs of family but drives ridership is really what we were looking for. And through the research and through working with other partners across the network, we were able to identify that if we were to allow kids to ride free, we would actually see greater rideship from fare-paying adults because it now becomes a more appropriate service because up until then, it's a lot easier to take your car to destination, especially on off-peak times and weekends, which are really good growth opportunities for us. So the idea behind this is let's take a look, let's pilot out. The idea originally actually came from Sharon, who'll be up after myself, and we worked as a support function to see whether or not that idea would fly. The initial model said that we expected about a 20,000 lift in ridership, looking at things like price elasticity, populations in the area, number of families with kids. It actually exceeded that expectation, but at the same time, we had incremental services added to the network as well, and there's growth in the area. So we're still trying to digest all the different elements that can contribute to it, but those are key factors. We launched the pilot, and then one of the kind of fun insights for me that we learned throughout the pilot is how we communicate is also important. Customers are also creatures of habit. So while it was free for a lot of people and they took up on it, we still saw people paying for the kids to use the service. So it's just information that we need to take away for us going forward as well. The learning opportunities.
I might just add, I think one of the values is certainly monitoring, but also then learning and course correcting and then validating such pilots. And this is just one example of those pilots where we can then potentially model out what we think other pilots might look like.
Questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
There was a resolution.
Oh, there's a, yeah. Let me get to it here.
I don't either. I don't understand the to move.
You like it?
Yeah.
But I'm pleased to move it.
Thank you. A seconder. Kathy.
Make me feel bad.
An emphatic second. All in favor? Any opposed?
Think through why we have
Okay, pass. No, you're right. I kind of agree with you. Okay, the next one Mark's going to stay up and do is brand strategy. And we have Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce Sharon, our lead for digital and brand strategy. And I think, as we just heard, data and analytics and insights are very important. It's what you do with that data and analytics. And of course, with our team led by Sharon, looking for fresh ways to strengthen and evolve our brand portfolio with the goal of ultimately connecting with, engaging, and encouraging customers and future potential riders to embrace our transit options. And so Sharon is going to walk you through the details of a very robust journey, which started in actually 2015 with a pulse check on where we are with our brands. That research work, as we've already reported back to this table, was refreshed this past summer. And so what's really exciting about the work that Sharon's going to share with you now is how we're learning and leaning into the insights to build out that growth plan that will ultimately help us continue the momentum of driving ridership, building brand and loyalty.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. So I will assume that this item has been read, so I'll just try and hit some of the highlights as we go through. There is a resolution, hopefully for the board to endorse. But really, I just wanted to underscore right off the outset is that brand strategy is more than just a logo. It is a fundamental part of our business planning. It's more than just something in a marketing toolkit. It's something that helps us meet our very aggressive KPIs, especially when it comes to ridership and revenue, for loyalty, attracting partners, attracting talent. It really underscores all of our business decision making. So I think that that's important that we kind of level set on brand. We also look at brand strategy when it comes to the customer. So for the end-to-end customer experience, brand strategy has a role to play every single element, every single moment. So for brand to be internalized by the organization, by ops, by service planning, that they can think about brand from the customer's perspective. It's very, very important. For me, and I have a very strict budget, so brand strategy and a strong brand strategy helps me tell every single dollar that I have where it needs to go and tell it to bring me back $3 in return when it comes to revenue. So brand strategy in that regard has a very financial importance to everything that we're doing in marketing. So we're hoping today that we will get endorsement of the strategy that we're put forward. In the next subsequent slides, we have a kind of blown out each of the brands, and kind of it's more of an evolution of the brand essences and not a revolution. Doing this work with a portfolio of brands that has a mix of young brands and very mature brands like Go, it's kind of like changing the wheels on the bus when it's halfway down the highway. So a big credit to the team back in the office for their patience and diligence and really listening to customers and what they want and the value that they place on the brands that we have in our portfolio. So I just wanted to give them a big props because a lot of the work that you'll see here was all done internally. Well, a lot of it was done internally, which achieved a lot of savings for us when it comes to not reaching out to external vendors. One highlight on this slide that I'd like to pull is our brand promise. When we looked at all of the different brands, each brand could have its own promise, but that gets really, really complicated, especially when we look at employees and we look at how we want to engage them and have them internalize the brand. And really where we netted out, when we kind of did discovery and distilled and look at all the brands individually and then as part of a family, is that why do we exist? We exist to give people the choice to live, work, and play where they choose. And that's really important for our transit safety officers, for our frontline staff, for people who are in service planning or in capital projects. We want them to internalize that brand promise. It's the reason they come to work every day, and it is the filter through which that they make their decisions. There were some interesting things as we went through the brand research that Mark mentioned came to CEC, but for the benefits of the new board members, just some kind of net takeaways. Up out of our portfolio of brands, really, really strong. It was actually our strongest brand. But what we did learn is that it's quite undiscovered. So for people who don't know about the service, there's very low awareness, there's very low intention to use. But for those who have actually used Up Express, they love it. So for us, from a brand strategy perspective for Up, we know that we want to lean into that. So we want to incent trial. Because the more people try our service, the more they love it, the more they're going to tell people about it. What was interesting on the Go Transit brand was that we'd actually lost, we had eroded emotional connection for Go. This is a 52-year-old brand, and over the years, over time, it's lost relevance in people's lives. So we looked at this brand, how can we reinvigorate it? How can we bring it back and make it important to people? So we actually netted out with a new strategy, and that's instead of being just another way to get there, Go Transit is actually a way for you to make time in your day. You can sleep, you can do work, you can browse memes of cats, whatever you choose to do in those 45 minutes or whatever it is that you're on Go Transit. It's your time, and it's found time. It's incremental time. So you're actually optimizing, because we certainly don't want you browsing memes of cats in the car. So you can take Go Transit and do that. For Presto, really, a lot of the work that Annalise and her team are doing are really setting Presto up as a game changer when it comes to seamlessly accessing the network. So it was great for us to be able to lean into that, and but also have a bit of fun with this brand. It's a very young, very modern brand. So we actually established some interesting choices when it comes to the tone of voice work. But really, how does it all come together, and what does it really mean? I kind of go back to what I said at the start, is that we need to bring the brand promise to life throughout the organization. This is just, I only chose these 12 boxes. There's about 75 boxes, but this really shows you where the brand can come to life throughout the organization, whether it's a very compelling advertising campaign or an end-to-end customer experience at that top integrated layer. Down at the organizational design, it's how we write a job ad to attract the same talent that we're fighting for with everybody else in the city. It is how we set up our internal culture. So it has a very important part to play, and it's very, very measurable. And it all ladders back to those KPIs that I mentioned at the beginning. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions, anyone?
No? And we have a resolution, and that is really just looking for your endorsement and support to move forward with this brand strategy work. A very critical next step for us is to internalize it, and we're very happy that we have senior executive support that understands and appreciates how important it is for brands. So we know that we have the support behind us from the executive team.
And Mark, I shared with the board that at our strategy retreat, the senior management team will be working through how do we make our objectives that we set for next year, objectives that are about how we operate, how we live, how we breathe, and how those are all related to the brand. The brand comes alive through what we do in every part of the business. And I know you're going to lead a discussion on the day around that, and maybe you'd like to just give the board a sense of that.
Yeah, I think I'd start off by saying I think sort of as we've worked on the Metrolinx brand and the service brands, I think we have thought about how the whole works. So how there is connection between all the brands and making sure that we're bringing that to life organizationally, but also how it informs the strategy choices. And I think it really all does start with putting the customer first. And I know we've shared in prior board sessions and with the Customer Experience Committee, how in putting the customer first insightfully around our trip purpose work, we're feeling that we are and can be making more meaningful connections that ultimately deliver ridership. So those are absolutely some of those questions that we'll be tackling strategically as a team.
It's hard. I less about this presentation, but my question has always been, as you know, Mark, how Metrolinx, you say it at the start, but how Metrolinx really is at the center of all the brands. Because when I see advertisements on Up and the Up printing and the Up logo, it's different than the Go logo. Somewhere, sometimes there'll be the little Metrolinx squiggle. But it doesn't, and then Presto has its own graphic and then also its own problems. I'm just not emotionally seeing the connection in our work that Metrolinx really is at the center of the brand. And I, always when we started this 2 years ago, I was, remember they gave us 4 options, and I was always the one about wanting it to be not single, but I mean, I know we had 4 separate brands, but I don't feel that we're really feeling the Metrolinx centricity. Centrality.
And I think it's a fair comment, and I think the intention and part of why I held on this particular slide is we actually do see the Metrolinx brand as the sort of the master brand or the house of brands, the service brands that fall underneath. What you're not seeing is work that we have an absolute intention to bring much more close unification in visualization cues, in communication than we have done in the past. That is absolutely the case. And I think, as you can see on from Sharon's presentation, we think there is a very important aspect of time and the insights around time that can actually help us bring that closer connection.
But you're going to keep the separate graphics around logos, right?
So we are any change in graphics and logos have to be treated with the utmost care, particularly on a brand such as Go that's been around for 52 years. So if we make evolutions to brand representations like we have with Up just recently, it is around unifying and bringing closeness together.
It's interesting, because in packaged goods, you've got people like General Foods who don't advertise General Foods.
Well, that was
they have all their separate brands, but then there's other people do it exactly the opposite way. Which is the right way to do it is, I think, something that everybody fights about.
That's exactly the debate we had.
Can I piggyback back on it? Yeah. Because it's something that actually you said that twigged me to it. The brand wording and the superficial symbolic stuff is one thing, which is I'm not being pejorative here, but to a large extent, some of this is that. It's all about behavior, culture, how people are rewarded and recognized and all of that. And I go back to the better, faster, easier, and I think of the ideal for the customer. Integrated fare, the technology that gets me from A to B, doesn't matter where A and B crosses boundaries municipally. To me, the better, faster, easier, the behaviors, the customer experience, it's one thing to me. It's not UP. It's
reliability.
It's not Presto, and it's not Go, with the underlying organizational structure being Metrolinx. And so I don't get it either. I wonder why it feels like we have a foot in each camp. The strategy where you have the different brands, but then the strategy where you actually have one, and we're kind of doing both.
I'd just like to jump in here. So So on this slide, actually, you'll see that those boxes that are highlighted in yellow, that's really the organizing framework. So they're the three elements of the brand architecture that are consistent across all of the brands. Our corporate vision is what our corporate vision is. What we believe is consistent across all of our brands.
Right.
And then our promise is consistent across all of our brands. So you make an excellent point, but that is exactly the intention of this brand work.
Yep.
Where we differentiate is where each of the service brands has its own customer value proposition. So Up is a reliable, stress-free 25 minutes to the airport. Go gives you the opportunity to make time. And then Presto is tap and go, it's seamless access. So they own value propositions, but they all ladder up to the same brand promise.
I see tremendous progress on developing sub-brand stories. And maybe the next piece of work might have to do with how do they integrate under an overarching story. To do that effectively, you generally need to do an integrated design strategy. Because a lot of the issues that some of the other board members are bringing up have to do with what is the overall brand architecture, and without the overarching story, the brand architecture is hard to do. And unless you've done an integrated design strategy that looks at all the brand touch points and how they're experienced, then you can't synthesize it. And I think, if I can paraphrase what they're looking for that synthesis, right? So I was going to ask you, is your next step to undertake an integrated design strategy that would support the brands and to develop that overarching story?
That work is indeed underway.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sharon.
There was a resolution.
Yeah. So the resolution is just to support the work that they're doing. I have a motion. Thanks, Chloe. Secondary. Thanks, Luigi. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next, Greg is up with the Customer Experience Committee report. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. We've taken some license with the customer experience report, and we're going to focus in on what Phil had touched on at the beginning of the meeting, which was our January 7th service launch into Kitchener-Niagara Falls. And I think it's important, and particularly since we have a large contingent of new board members, that you see that we don't just bring good news into the board, we bring real news into the board, whether it's good or bad. And sometimes we have lessons learned, and this is the storyline for this conversation. So January 7th followed an increase of service in 2018 of 23% roughly, and a really good takeaway for my team and others is you're only as good as your last decision. And our set of decisions around January 7th, particularly focusing on customer experience, customer behaviors, customer impacts, needed to improve. Where I think technically, and I won't get into the technical side of the launch because that was okay, but I want to really hone in on the customer piece. And there's a number of takeaways that we've had. There's a number of takeaways that have been built in to the 70+ risk factors that we are working through very quickly to be ready to do a February 13th basic relaunch of the Kitchener service. I won't talk about Niagara Falls either because actually that went quite well, all things considered. So some of the things that we would do differently right away is simple things like we didn't need to launch the service right before Christmas, or at least announce it, then launch it right after Christmas. We just didn't need to do that. And so the February 13th obviously is midweek, and we felt midweek makes more sense because it enables us to communicate with our customers right up to the night before. So it makes it front of mind instead of sort of putting it in the holiday period where people have 100 other things to think about other than just new service. So that was a real easy fix that we just, as a team of 30, we didn't latch onto that as a simple thing that we should have done differently. Some of the other things, we took a corridor that really hadn't had a lot of change, and we caused significant change, and they simply weren't used to it. We made it more complicated because we converted, and we had no idea at the time that the express service that we had put in was so well embraced by the corridor customers that taking it away was seen as exactly that. We were taking something away that they didn't want taken away. And we really didn't take it. We converted it to an all-stop service, but in their minds, we took it away. We took away the express option. So as Phil had announced a week or so ago, that's being reinstated exactly as it was before on February 13th. But some of the other things that we did differently, we would do differently and will do differently with respect to customers, understanding the impact of the train mix. We were able to add more service because we've had a real shift in collaboration with CN. Traditionally, it was not as collaborative as it is now, and to the credit of Phil, Steve Levine, and some others, we're in a little better place with them. But there's still, we have to run over their corridor. Uniqueness of this particular corridor, we bookend a piece that CN owns. So we cannot make controlled decisions on what we want to do. So we absolutely have to collaborate with them to enable new service. And they were very strong about having a 30-minute gap between trains for us to create 30 minutes, but yet add some new capability. We had to make a bunch of changes. Those changes, we are doing better understanding now through the great work that Ken and Maureen are adding into our risk assessment team, is to better understand what those shifts are between customers and trains. We had crowding on both platforms and trains initially because they shifted all one way, and they all jumped on an earlier train, and we didn't see that coming. And so we've done quite a bit of work now to understand, do the diagnostics of how customers move across trains in a mix of a 3-hour window of train service. That's a level of diagnostics that's really, really going to be helpful as we design more train service into the future. So what we did immediately was we added to 2 trains, 2 extra coaches to relieve the crowding risk on platforms and on board. That was helpful. But we never did get back that goodwill we lost from removing the express train. So what we've done since is we have a team of more than 30 people. We've been meeting 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, redesigning the service offering to make it more attractive, to give back the express service as we had promised we would. As I say, we had over 70 risk factors that we had to deal directly with. And it's a very subtle but really important point is we had a large number of risk factors before, but we didn't properly interrogate those risks where it was identified as a high-level risk. We left it as a high-level risk as opposed to taking it and making it as granular as possible, which is what we've now done. So those are all learnings that we had from the launch on January 7th that we will adjust and make better on the February 13th. I could go on a bit further. Our learnings were certainly significant, but I'd like to sort of open up the floor to any questions.
Please, Robert.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for that presentation. And as a new board member, I must say I was very pleased to see how swiftly and transparently we came out and stated that we own this. And I think, that's how we rebuild trust, frankly. My question relates to the action plan, which I think is well developed, and obviously we've learned a lot through this process. Can you speak to equipment? Because I know that there was both locomotive switching and other things. Can you just speak to that and what's going to be done to ensure that we have contingencies in place on that item?
Sure. What was sort of compounding the challenge of service delivery after sort of a misfire on January 7th was we went through an extreme cold record-setting situation in Toronto, which stresses our rail equipment, it stresses our infrastructure, it stresses the airport and others. But we didn't want to hide behind that. We made some fundamental errors in how we launched the service. But nevertheless, those challenges made things more complicated. So for locomotives, the trip into Kitchener, I don't want to get too techy, but it's single track from Georgetown in. So you have to design your service until such time as you can invest in double track or passing tracks. We really need to plan our service carefully to make really good use of the single track infrastructure. But when a locomotive fails in that quarter and stuff gets queued up behind there, you have to have contingency plans well in place. So what we've done with our locomotives, because we have been stressed this winter with our locomotives, is we are microing down on every failure and we're replacing and fixing as fast as we can to get it back into service. We don't we don't have a parking lot of spare locomotives. We are a lean machine for the benefit of the taxpayer, so we have to make sure the locomotives we have are running the best they can. So that is how we handle the locomotive issues. We are at the same time commissioning 16 new locomotives, but they're not ready for regular service yet because we want to add that risk into the mix. And if I may, I'll talk a little bit about the airport service, the Up Express, and the equipment challenges we had there. That Up Express service is 4 years old this coming June. The decisions made on the equipment were made some 7 years ago, and it had time for production and so forth. At the time, there was no such thing, no reference to a polar vortex or anything like that. So they were designed around climate conditions at the time. What we're seeing now really stresses the design that we thought was suitable at the time. And that's because a lot of the, I'll call them moving parts, are underneath the DMU design. And that's where you get a collection of snow and ice, and wind blows the snow into places you don't want it to be. We actually had, we think we stressed out to the boundary of the limitations of the equipment when we hit minus 38 degrees Celsius. We actually had the equipment freeze out, and we had to take it in and thaw it out and put it back into service. So it's the first time in the Up history we suspended service between 8:30 and 12:30. But so we will, after this winter, we've got the conversations going now, but the physical adjustments will occur after this winter in readiness for next winter. And that is our world. We, as soon as winter's over, we start designing and getting ready for the next winter. So I hope that answered your question in terms of locomotive capacity. And
Thank you, it does.
yeah, is that okay? Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Greg.
And Greg, we're ready for the 13th.
You better believe it.
Thank you.
Or else.
Okay, the rest of the quarterly reports are here basically for information, but obviously if there's any questions on behalf of any of the board members, please feel free to ask now. Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. And thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll reconvene in about half an hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, so it's game on now.
Yep.
Gone.